Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We are at GearFest 2014, and we are joined by mastering engineer Stephen Marsh. Stephen, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mitch.
Making the trip out from California. You gave a seminar on behalf of PreSonus, and talking about all kinds of mastering stuff going on there, right?
Yeah, mastering community's made a real effort in the last few years to reach out and make sure that people are educated about what it is we're able to do, what it is we're not able to do, and how they can avail themselves of that or do it themselves, gain a little more knowledge and experience and give it a shot. So it's kind of what GearFest is all about. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thought we had to come down and do it here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So how did you get started? What led you into the field of mastering?
I was working at a Taco Bell in upstate New York, like everybody.
Sure.
And a friend of mine came in one night and said, I'm just making the rounds around town. I want to say, goodbye to everybody. I'm moving to California in 2 weeks. And I I remember very distinctly leaning down on the counter and looking at one end of the counter, looking at the other end of the counter, saying, I'm going to go with you.
Yeah.
And came out to California, got a job as a runner, gopher, I called it coffee engineer, and caught the eye of a mastering engineer at the studio I was working at, and he said, hey, sort of the classic, hey kid, you want a shot? And that was at Sony Music Studios.
Wow.
And it was pretty cool. I was 19. I knew almost nobody in Los Angeles, but I'd always played in bands. I'd always been in bands. I was sort of always like the guy in the band that ran the PA, And so I had a real interest in it. And my friend who was coming out was a drummer. And that sort of got me started. Once I got into a mastering room and I understood what mastering was, I realized the way that I heard music really fit in really well with that. So mixing, sort of inside-out listening, mastering is much more sort of outside-in listening, and that sort of suits the way that I interpret and understand music. So while I'm an absolutely deplorable mixer, I'm a pretty fair mastering engineer.
So can you expand on that? What does that mean, inside-out listening versus outside-in listening?
I think when you're, what I call inside-out listening is when you're in the mix environment, you have individual discrete control of everything. You've got a kick drum and a snare drum and a vocal and a guitar and a keyboard. And if you need the guitar louder, you just raise the guitar. If you need a guitar quieter, you lower the guitar. And your general concern is getting all the volumes of everything in relation to each other correct, and then placing them in the stereo field. In mastering, I think of it as much more outside-in listening. I want to step back from that. I want to sort of view the music in total. And then I may dive in, and it's much more about balancing tones. So it's much more about make sure the vocal sits right against the overall music, maybe not just against the background vocals or against the guitar or something else. It's about overall sort of sonic things, and we're not generally using levels and panning. We're generally using EQ and compression to do that. And the other aspect of it is, if I need to go back to what we were talking about, if I need to raise or lower a guitar, I have to find a way to do that with EQ and compression without a fader. And there's a lot of technology out there today that will allow you to sort of not isolate, but sort of quasi-isolate things and almost remix certain portions of the song.
Right.
So in that sense, I think of it as, I said, outside-in listening, because I'm always referencing the whole. Anytime, even if I do dive into something and I'm trying to do something discrete or specific, I'm doing it to the whole, and by that I mean the whole mix. And I'm always referencing the whole mix. I'm always stepping back and saying, okay, how did what I do fit in with the overall sound?
So as a mastering engineer, one of the things that has always fascinated watching someone like yourself work is the ability to kind of go in and know what things should sound like without having to listen to a reference, kind of with a very objective, kind of a thing. Is that something you developed, or is it just from years of working, or where did that come from?
I think it comes from, obviously everybody has sort of their own tastes and their own opinions, and I think that's where it starts, and then that gets developed and refined by listening and experience. And every genre is going to be a little different, every artist is going to be a little different, every producer is going to want a little something different, but it generally falls within an overall set of brackets.
Okay.
So you've got, you have a range that you're working within. So I don't, like if say a rock project comes in, I may not sort of do my rock thing, but I know that it's going to fall within a range of things.
Okay.
And that's developed over the years. It's just, you get a vibe, and that changes. And that's another thing I should say is that, what I would do to a rock record 10 years ago is going to be different than what I do to it now and what I used to do to 20 years ago. Technology's changed, people's tastes have changed, the way the music's produced and the way the music's distributed has changed. So all those factors have to come into play, and it informs the decisions that we make by and large. So it is always evolving. And so in that sense, a lot of mastering is a lot about just sort of understanding what things sound like now, and a lot of times remastering is understanding what things should have sounded like then.
Right.
And they're two very different things, but it comes over time. You just sort of develop it. You have your own, you start with your own proclivities, and then you hone those based on what you find is successful.
Mm-hmm. And when you work in different areas, so you do record, if there are records anymore, record mastering and film and other things as well. What are the differences when you're mastering for those different medias?
A lot of times the requirements are somewhat similar in that everybody's looking for an enhancement or an embellishment of the audio, or at the very least, not for it to be destroyed. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, they're very similar, but they're different in that how the material comes to you and how it goes out, the way you're going to format material, and also the creative decisions that you make. If I know something is going to go specifically, it's like, this is a radio single, we're distributing it out to radio, and that's it.
Right.
I will probably do something a little different to it than if I know it's going to go, this is an album release, this is going to be one of 12 songs, it's going to be put on iTunes, it's going to be put here. It's like, if it's just going to be a radio single, you may process differently. If it's just going to be an internet-only release, maybe just an MP3 or just an AAC or something, you may do it a little differently. So the considerations in how you deliver the formats and the processing choices that you make may vary a little bit. But for the most part, the overall idea is the same. It's about taking creative output and fashioning it into a commercially releasable way, commercially releasable format.
Okay, right. Now, if someone wants to make a stab at doing their own mastering, and they have their studio set up at home, they're used to doing mixing and tracking in that studio, what are the critical things they need to look at to kind of make that studio more suitable for mastering?
I think things that lend themselves to mastering in a studio are an environment that's more or less neutral. Mm-hmm. I think trying to do mastering in a room that's really reflective or really absorptive, either one of the extremes, like the room we're sitting in here, for instance, would probably be a little more absorptive than I want in a mastering room. Mm-hmm. I want a little more diffusion in there because I want to be able to sense the space a little more.
Okay.
And also just getting a pretty accurate monitoring. I mean, what you're listening to is so much more important than what you're doing to it. Because if you can hear accurately, you'll find that you have to make way fewer decisions in terms of how much EQ and compression to use. You're hearing it more. You don't, like, as long as it was well recorded. If it's well recorded and you can hear it accurately, you're going to find you don't have to do much to a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. Some stuff needs a ton of work, but most stuff needs very little. It's just sort of dressing. And if you can really understand exactly what you've got and what you need, where you need to get it, you know, that's the key, and that goes to the room, the monitors, and what you're hearing.
Right. So you mentioned monitoring and how important that is, and one of the things you were talking about during your workshop was the PreSonus monitors, the Scepters.
Yeah.
Tell us what attracts you to those, and why PreSonus has you representing them here.
Well, Dave Bryce, their rep, reached out to me, and he said, you know, I got these speakers, the new thing I'm doing and the new thing they're doing, and I think they're pretty cool. I'd love to hear them in your room. And so I said, all right, bring them down. You know, I'm not a huge midfield or near field fan. Like I use them. I've used some in the past, and but I generally tend to filter everything through my mains. It's what the room was sort of built around, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And he brought these speakers in, and I didn't have low expectations, but I wasn't expecting to be impressed.
Right.
And I was pretty much floored.
Really?
Yeah. The nature of those speakers is pretty powerful. They have very pleasant, pleasing sound, which usually you get in like a home monitor, like not necessarily a monitor, but a home speaker, a listening device.
Sure.
You know, usually monitors tend to be pretty clinical, in maybe not a musical way always. You know, like the classic NS10 thing. Like, well, does it sound good on NS10s? Nope. Perfect. Print it. You know, it's like these actually split the difference right down the middle, where they're very pleasing to listen to, but I can also extract information that I need from them. I can also learn things about the music I'm working on from them. And you can't say that about all monitors. Right. Some monitors will sound a little more pedestrian, and they help you to, to sort of translate that sound to a more pedestrian set of monitors. Some monitors sound way more high-end, and they help you translate the music to that sort of format, you know, if it's going to be listened to in an audiophile environment or something.
Right.
But the PreSonus really split right down the middle. It really has detail and clarity, and it's really revelatory in a way that is helpful to my work. It's not just something that I like to listen to, but it also is something I like to listen to. And I find those two things don't always go together in studio monitors.
Right.
Very, very uncommon.
Right.
So I was pretty blown away.
Yeah, and that's something that also helps out when you're mixing, or when you're tracking as well,
Yeah.
because you want to have that kind of combination in there. So.
Well, the way they did the design, it minimizes the effect of the crossover to such an extent that it's almost like listening to a one-way monitor. but it's full range.
Right.
And that's what I think is the most unique thing about it, is that as I move around the room, it stays consistent. My client's on the couch hear basically what I'm hearing at the mix position. So in that way, they're very functional.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Nice, that's great.
Cool boxes.
Yeah, wonderful. So for someone who is, they're working on a project, they've done their mixes and they're about to send it off for mastering, what are the kind of things that you see are common problems for projects that you receive from people? Are there things that jump out at you that you see all the time?
Yeah, there are a couple things that come back up a lot. One, excessive use of limiting and compression. We get stuff that comes in with so much level crammed onto it that there's not only no room for us to work, there's nothing for us to do anyway. I mean, a lot of times if something comes in really baked, I say to my assistant, like, well, it's, run it through the console and print it. There's nothing I can do to it. It's been obliterated already. And anytime, the thing with packing signals so tightly together is when you try to then go back and unpack some of it, you throw off that balance of frequencies that kind of made it almost work to begin with, and the whole thing collapses. So a lot of times if something comes in really overbaked, that can be a big issue. Way too much level. There'll also be, and that could be stereo level, like where they sort of slathered on some limiter at the end of it. It could also be the individual tracks. I've gotten music come in where you look at the waveform and you're like, man, there's a lot of dynamic range here. And then when you start to dive in, you realize, oh no, there isn't. There's like, that's just the snare drum.
Right.
All the rest of the music exists in this bar beneath it, which makes it look like this. It just happens to have the snare drum has to be way too hot. The rest of the music is compressed to death. So you can't really judge with your eyes, but levels and disbalances, that's the other big thing. And that I think goes back to monitoring, where if you're going to adjust the 45 hertz on your mix, you got to be able to hear it. If you're going to adjust 55 hertz, you got to be able to hear it, and the other extreme as well. And when you get smaller speakers in a room and it's interacting with the walls and the people and the equipment and the person's own personal taste, you can get stuff sort of skewed off to the side. I think that's one of the biggest things in mastering is like, if you may love your project, but it might just be like over to the side a little bit. It might just need to be just kicked back over to the middle more. Right. And it's, like I said, that's part of that stepping back and like taking it all in, being subjective and just, okay, wait a minute. And that's one of the most powerful pieces of equipment that I have is just an objective point of view. I mean, it's nothing to do with anything on a console. Just being able to, I'm not married to anything. Right. And then that helps in other ways too. We're not just EQ's decisions, but like, you have a, 24 bar guitar solo in the middle of a pop song. Probably not the best idea, but if you're the guitar player in the band, there's no way you're going to let it be cut. Right. But I didn't play guitar in it. I'll chop 16 bars out of that and make it a nice 8-bar. Done. Back to the song. Okay, back to the hook. Right. It's like, and sometimes artists don't want to do that, but I can be sort of brutal in that way. So. Right. So yeah, getting that extra set of ears on the project can be a really important thing. And it's, as over time, what happens is I find that when I work with clients multiple times, you develop a shorthand where maybe the first session, the client and the producer engineer comes in and we talk a lot. Maybe we do a couple of revisions on things and we really get dialed in. The next project, maybe they stop in to drop off the material, listen to a couple songs and then book. The third session, send it over, let me know when it's done. Right. And it allows them to keep functioning. And that's what I view my job is to allow them to do their job. Right. If I can provide that sort of backdrop or backstop for them where whatever they've got going on, they know they've got sort of a safety valve, it lets them be creative and do what they do. And I don't want to restrain what they do or restrict what they do. I just want to support it. I think it's important for mastering to support the earlier processes in production. And if they all work hand in hand, then you get something that really, really works and people can respond, which is the magic. I mean, that's why we do it. Right, right, absolutely. Yeah. Stephen, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you sharing all your expertise on these topics, and definitely going to spend some time with the Scepters and check that out, because that's a high recommendation. I've heard them. I just haven't had them in my studio yet, so I'm kind of now anxious to get them in there and put them through their paces. Cool. So I appreciate that. Yeah. But pleasure to have you here. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks very much. I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.